The ink on the divorce papers was still wet, but the silence in the room was deafening. Larkin Whittaker thought he was discarding a penniless burden, a woman he had saved from a life of mediocrity. He stood there, flanked by his mistress and his sneering mother, hurling insults at the woman who had spent 3 years folding his shirts and nursing his ego. What Larkin didn't know, what he couldn't possibly fathom, was that the 3 men standing in the shadows of the foyer weren't debt collectors. They were the Montgomerys, and the woman he just called worthless was the sole heiress to the very empire currently deciding whether to crush his company into dust. The crystal chandelier in the grand ballroom of the Pierre Hotel reflected 1,000 tiny fractures, much like Evelyn's marriage. It was their 3rd wedding anniversary, but Evelyn wasn't wearing the diamond necklace Larkin had promised her. Instead, she stood in a corner, holding a lukewarm glass of sparkling water, wearing a dress she had bought on sale 2 years ago. Larkin Whittaker, the golden boy of tech, was 30 feet away, his arm draped casually around the waist of Chloe Vane, a high-profile marketing consultant with a penchant for plunging necklines and calculated laughs. "Look at her," Beatrice Whittaker, Larkin's mother, hissed as she approached Evelyn. Beatrice was draped in vintage Chanel, her eyes scanning Evelyn's modest appearance with visceral disgust. "You look like the help, Evelyn. On a night when Larkin is finalizing the merger with Montgomery International, you show up looking like a tragic afterthought. Do you have no pride?" Evelyn set her glass down on a passing tray. Her hands were steady, though her heart felt like it was being squeezed by a vice. "I told Larkin I didn't have a budget for a new gown this month, Beatrice. He reminded me that since I don't contribute to the household income, I should be grateful for the roof over my head." Beatrice scoffed, her lip curling. "He's right. You were a waitress when he found you. A nobody from a nowhere town. You should be on your knees thanking him for the Whittaker name. Instead, you're a social embarrassment." Across the room, Larkin laughed at something Chloe said. He looked powerful, tanned, and utterly indifferent to the woman he had promised to cherish. 3 years ago, Evelyn had fallen for his drive, his perceived kindness. She had hidden her true identity, the youngest daughter of Arthur Montgomery, because she wanted to be loved for herself, not her trust fund. She wanted a real life, away from the suffocating security and the gold-plated expectations of her family. But the real life had turned into a gilded cage of psychological warfare. Larkin had spent 3 years chipping away at her confidence, gaslighting her into believing she was incompetent and isolating her from everyone she knew. Suddenly the music dipped. Larkin stepped onto the small stage, a microphone in hand. "Friends, colleagues," Larkin began, his voice booming with the practiced charisma of a man who owned the room. "Tonight is a celebration of growth. Whittaker Tech is on the verge of greatness. We are awaiting the arrival of the Montgomery representatives to sign the final partnership papers." He paused, his eyes finding Evelyn in the back. There was no warmth in them, only a cold, transactional flick of his gaze before he turned back to the crowd. "And while we celebrate the future, I must also address the past. Some things are meant to be temporary, stepping stones on the path to success. I've realized that to reach the summit, you have to shed the weight that holds you back." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Chloe Vane smirked, adjusted her hair, and looked directly at Evelyn. "Evelyn," Larkin said, his voice dropping into a tone of mock sympathy that made her skin crawl. "I think it's best if we stop pretending. The divorce papers are in my office upstairs. I've already signed them. Don't make a scene. Just go up, sign them, and leave quietly through the service entrance. You don't belong here. You never did." The room went silent. The humiliation was surgical. "Larkin?" Evelyn's voice was soft, barely a whisper, yet it seemed to carry. "Don't," he snapped, his face hardening. "I've provided for you for 3 years. Consider the clothes on your back your severance package. My lawyer will send you a check for $5,000 to get you settled back in whatever hole you crawled out of. Now go. The Montgomerys will be here any minute, and I won't have you staining the carpet when they arrive." Beatrice stepped forward, clutching Evelyn's arm with surprising strength, leaning in to whisper, "Go, you pathetic little mouse, before I have security drag you out." Evelyn looked at Larkin. She looked at the man she had cooked for, the man she had stayed up with when he had panic attacks about his first IPO, the man she had sacrificed her own dreams for. He looked at her like she was a stain on his bespoke suit. "Fine," Evelyn said. Her voice wasn't trembling anymore. It was cold, a type of cold Larkin hadn't heard before, the kind of cold that reminded one of a deep, dark winter. "I'll sign." She turned and walked towards the elevators, the laughter of the elite ringing in her ears. Upstairs, in the quiet of Larkin's temporary office, the divorce papers sat on the mahogany desk. Beside them was a pen, a Mont Blanc, ironically, a gift from her father that she had given Larkin for his birthday. Evelyn picked up the pen. She didn't cry. She didn't hesitate. She signed Evelyn Montgomery Whittaker for the last time. As she laid the pen down, her phone buzzed in her clutch. "Private ID. We are downstairs, Eve. The jet is fueled. Dad is losing his patience. Are we done playing house?" Evelyn picked up the phone. She looked at her reflection in the darkened window. The mouse was gone. The heiress was back. "I'm done," she whispered into the phone. "Tell my brother to bring the lawyers, and tell Dad. Tell him I want Whittaker Tech for breakfast." She walked out of the office, but she didn't head for the service entrance. She headed back to the ballroom. But this time she wasn't alone. As she reached the top of the grand staircase, the massive oak doors of the hotel lobby swung open. 4 men in charcoal suits entered. In the center was Arthur Montgomery, a man whose face was on the cover of every financial magazine in the world. To his left was his eldest son, Bennett Montgomery, the shark of Wall Street. Larkin Whittaker saw them and practically tripped over himself to get to the door. "Mr. Montgomery, sir, it is an absolute honor. We were just expecting your associates. I didn't realize you'd attend personally." Larkin reached out a hand, his face split into a sycophantic grin. Arthur Montgomery didn't even look at Larkin's hand. He looked past him, up to the staircase where Evelyn was descending. "Evelyn," Arthur's voice boomed, silencing the entire room. "You're late, and you look terrible. Who told you that dress was acceptable for a Montgomery?" The silence that followed was so heavy, it felt physical. Larkin's hand stayed frozen in mid-air. He looked at Arthur. Then he looked at Evelyn. Then back to Arthur. "Evelyn?" Larkin stammered, his voice cracking. "Mr. Montgomery, I think there's a misunderstanding. This is my ex-wife. She was just leaving." Bennett Montgomery stepped forward, his eyes fixed on Larkin with the predatory stillness of a wolf. "Ex-wife?" Bennett asked softly. "That's funny, Larkin, because we're here to discuss the merger, and as it turns out, my sister owns 51% of the holding company you were trying to partner with." Evelyn reached the bottom of the stairs. She walked past the stunned guests, past the trembling Beatrice, and stood right in front of Larkin. "I signed the papers, Larkin," she said, her voice clear and resonant. "The weight has been shed. But you were wrong about one thing." She leaned in, her eyes flashing with a fire that made Larkin flinch. "I didn't crawl out of a hole. I jumped out of a palace, and tonight I'm taking the keys back." The air in the Pierre Hotel ballroom felt like it had been sucked out by a vacuum. Larkin's hand, still hovering in the empty space between him and Arthur Montgomery, began to tremble. He looked at Evelyn, who stood tall, her shoulders back. The mouse-like timidity he had spent years cultivating in her vanished as if it had never existed. "Arthur." "Mr. Montgomery," Larkin managed to choke out, his face turning a sickly shade of grey. "There's been a massive misunderstanding. Evelyn, she never told me. She lived she lived very modestly. I had no idea she was related to your family." "Related?" Bennett Montgomery stepped forward, his eyes like flint. He was the eldest, the one who handled the cleanup for the Montgomery empire. She isn't just related, you idiot. She's the heartbeat of this family, and you just spent the last 20 minutes trying to publicly humiliate her." Beatrice Whittaker, realizing the catastrophic shift in the room's gravity, tried to salvage the situation with a brittle smile. She stepped toward Arthur, her hands fluttering near her pearls. "Mr. Montgomery, surely we can be civil. Young couples have their spats. Larkin was he was stressed about the merger. We think the world of Evelyn, truly." Evelyn turned her head slowly to look at her mother-in-law. "Really, Beatrice? 10 minutes ago, you called me a social embarrassment and told me I looked like the help. Should I tell my father about the time you made me scrub the floors of your summer house because you didn't trust the maid's attention to detail?" Arthur's eyes narrowed, a dark, dangerous look settling over his features. "You made a Montgomery scrub floors, Beatrice?" Beatrice paled, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Chloe Vane, sensing the sinking ship, tried to step back into the crowd, but Bennett's gaze snapped to her. "And you," Bennett said, his voice dripping with disdain. "Miss Vane, I believe you were the one marketing your way into my sister's marriage. I should let you know that I've already called the board at Vane Associates. Your father is a silent partner there, but the Montgomery Pension Fund owns the debt on his firm. By tomorrow morning, you'll be looking for a job in a much smaller city." Chloe's face crumpled. "Larkin, do something!" she hissed, grabbing Larkin's arm. Larkin, however, was staring at Evelyn. The realization was finally sinking in. The merger, the one thing that was supposed to take Whittaker Tech from a mid-level firm to a global titan, wasn't just in jeopardy. It was dead. And worse, he had just handed her the signed divorce papers. "Evelyn, honey," Larkin said, his voice dropping into that manipulative, soothing tone he always used when he wanted something. "Let's go talk in private. We're both emotional. The papers, I didn't mean it. It was a wake-up call, that's all. We can tear them up. We can start over." Evelyn let out a short, sharp laugh that cut through the room. "Tear them up, Larkin? Those papers are the best gift you've ever given me. But since you're so fond of shedding weight, I think it's time you knew exactly how heavy your company actually is." She looked at her father. Arthur nodded to a man standing near the entrance, Hudson, the Montgomerys' lead counsel. Hudson stepped forward, carrying a leather portfolio. "Mr. Whittaker," Hudson said, his voice clinical. 3 years ago, Whittaker Tech received an anonymous angel investment of $40 million. It's what kept your servers running and allowed you to acquire your first patents. "Do you remember?" Larkin nodded slowly. "Yes, an offshore group, the Zenith Fund." "The Zenith Fund is a subsidiary of Montgomery Holdings," Hudson continued, flipping open a document. "And the terms of that investment included a moral turpitude clause. Specifically, any action taken by the CEO that brings public scandal or harm to the Montgomery interests allows the fund to call in the debt in full, with 24 hours' notice." The color drained completely from Larkin's face. $40 million. I don't have that kind of liquid capital. It's all tied up in R&D. "I know," Evelyn said, stepping closer to him. She reached out and straightened his tie, a mockery of the dutiful wife she had been, which is why, as of 5 minutes ago, the Zenith Fund has initiated a hostile takeover. You didn't just divorce me, Larkin. You divorced your board of directors, your investors, and your bank account. "You can't do this," Beatrice shrieked. "This is our lives. Larkin worked for this." "He worked for it on my sister's back," Bennett growled. While she was making him dinner and listening to him complain about his hard day, she was secretly managing the Montgomery philanthropic arm from her laptop. She's twice the CEO he'll ever be. Arthur Montgomery stepped forward, placing a protective arm around Evelyn's shoulders. "We're leaving. This room smells of desperation and cheap perfume." He looked at Larkin one last time. "Don't bother going back to the penthouse, Larkin. The locks were changed 20 minutes ago. Your things are in garbage bags at the service entrance, just like you suggested for my daughter." As the Montgomery family turned to leave, the crowd parted like the Red Sea. The very people who had been snickering at Evelyn moments ago were now bowing their heads, trying to catch her eye, hoping she wouldn't remember their faces. But Evelyn didn't look back. She walked out of the Pier Hotel, the cool night air hitting her face like a benediction. "Where to, Eve?" Bennett asked as they reached the line of black SUVs. Evelyn looked at the divorce papers in her hand, then at the bright lights of the New York skyline. For 3 years, she had lived in the shadow of a man who thought she was nothing. "To the office," Evelyn said, her voice firm. "We have a board meeting at Whitaker Tech at 8 a.m. I want to be in Larkin's chair before he even gets through the front door." "That's my girl," Arthur beamed. But as the SUV pulled away, Evelyn saw a figure standing across the street, leaning against a silver Aston Martin. He was tall, wearing a dark overcoat, his eyes fixed on her through the window. It was Jasper, a man she hadn't seen since the day she told him she was marrying Larkin. Jasper, the only man who had ever truly known her, and the one man her father had forbidden her from seeing. He didn't wave. He just raised a glass in a silent toast and watched her disappear into the night. The battle for the Whitaker Empire had just begun, but the war for Evelyn's heart was about to get much more complicated. The sun hadn't even peaked over the East River when the glass doors of Whitaker Tech's headquarters slid open. Usually the lobby was a ghost town at 6:30 a.m., save for a few night shift security guards and the janitorial staff. But today, the air was electric, with a different kind of tension. Evelyn walked through the foyer, her footsteps echoing with a crisp, rhythmic authority. She wasn't wearing the modest, off-the-rack floral dress from the night before. She wore a bespoke navy power suit from Savile Row, her hair pulled back into a sharp, low bun. Behind her marched Hudson and a team of 4 junior associates, all carrying briefcases that looked like they contained enough legal firepower to level a city block. "Good morning, Mike," Evelyn said, nodding to the head of security. The guard blinked, his mouth falling open. "Mrs. Whitaker? Miss Montgomery. We were told, well, the internal memo from Mr. Whitaker said you weren't to be granted access." Evelyn didn't stop walking. She reached the biometric scanner and pressed her thumb against the glass. Access denied. A harsh red light flashed. Evelyn didn't flinch. She simply looked at Hudson. "The Zenith Fund took control of the digital infrastructure at 3 a.m., Mike," Hudson said, stepping forward. He handed the guard a thick stack of notarized documents. "Larkin Whitaker no longer has the authority to issue memos. As of this moment, Evelyn Montgomery is the acting chairperson of the board. Please update the system, or my team will be forced to call the New York Police Department to assist in our entry." Mike looked at the documents, then back at Evelyn. He had always liked her. She was the only executive spouse who ever bothered to ask about his kids. He quickly tapped a few keys on his console. Access granted. "Welcome, Director Montgomery." The elevator ride to the 42nd floor was silent. When the doors opened, the office was already buzzing. Word had leaked. The trophy wife was back, and she wasn't here to pick up her plants. She walked straight to Larkin's corner office, the office she had helped him design, choosing the ergonomic chairs and the specific shade of calming grey for the walls. She sat in his oversized leather chair and opened a laptop. Within seconds, she was deep into the company's internal ledger. "He's been hemorrhaging cash into the Vane project for 6 months, Evelyn muttered, her eyes scanning the spreadsheets. Chloe Vane wasn't just his mistress. She was a funnel for kickbacks. "It's worse than that," Hudson added, leaning over her shoulder. "He's been using company stock as collateral for personal loans to maintain that lifestyle he flaunts on Instagram. If the stock price drops even 5%, the banks will margin call his entire life." Evelyn leaned back, a cold smile touching her lips. "Then let's give the market a reason to worry." At 8:15 a.m., the door to the office slammed open. Larkin Whittaker stormed in, looking like a man who had spent the night sleeping in his car, which, given that the Montgomerys had locked him out of his penthouse, he likely had. His tuxedo shirt was wrinkled, his jaw was covered in stubble, and his eyes were bloodshot with rage. "Get out of my chair!" Larkin roared, slamming his hands on the desk. "Evelyn, I don't know what kind of stunt you think you're pulling with your father, but this is my company. You have no legal standing here." Evelyn didn't even look up from the screen. "You should read the fine print of the contracts you sign when you're desperate for money, Larkin. The Zenith Fund investment wasn't a loan. It was a convertible equity stake triggered by insolvency or reputational damage. You provided both last night at the Pierre." "I'll sue you," Larkin screamed. "I'll tell the press you're a manipulative heiress who went undercover to sabotage a self-made man." "Self-made?" A new voice entered the room. Evelyn looked up to see Bennett Montgomery leaning against the doorframe, a cup of coffee in his hand. "You were a self-made man, with a failing startup and $40 in your bank account, until my sister spent 3 years refining your code and managing your PR," Bennett said, his voice like a razor. "You didn't build Whittaker Tech. You were just the face we let the world see because Evelyn wanted a quiet life." Larkin turned, his face contorting. "Bennett, stay out of this. This is between a husband and wife." "You aren't a husband anymore," Evelyn said, finally closing the laptop and standing up. She walked around the desk until she was inches from him. Larkin tried to tower over her, but for the first time, he felt small. "I signed the papers. You wanted me out of your life because I was dead weight. Well, congratulations. You're finally unburdened. You're also unemployed. You can't fire me. I'm the founder." "The board meeting is in 5 minutes, Larkin," Evelyn said. "I've already secured the votes of the minority shareholders. They were quite interested to learn about the marketing fees you've been paying to Chloe Vane's shell company. In the business world, we call that embezzlement." Larkin's bravado vanished instantly. He stumbled back, hitting the glass wall of the office. "Evelyn, please, don't do this. We can talk about this. I was drunk last night. I didn't mean those things. I love you." "The only thing you love is the reflection of yourself in the window of a private jet," Evelyn replied. "Security is waiting for you at the elevator. Your personal effects will be sent to your mother's house. I'd suggest you go there now. I hear Beatrice is currently being served with a lawsuit for the return of the Montgomery family heirlooms she borrowed from our wedding registry." Larkin looked at Bennett, then at the stone-faced lawyers, and finally at Evelyn. He saw no mercy, only the reflection of a woman he had spent years trying to break, now forged into something unbreakable. Without another word, he turned and fled, the sound of his frantic footsteps muffled by the expensive carpet. "That felt good," Bennett admitted, taking a sip of his coffee. "But we have a problem." Evelyn frowned. "What kind of problem?" "Jasper Beaumont," Bennett said, his expression darkening. "He's downstairs. He says he has a prior agreement with Whittaker Tech that takes precedence over the Zenith Fund's takeover. And Eve, he won't talk to anyone but you." Evelyn felt a familiar spark of heat behind her ribs, a mixture of old affection and lingering resentment. Jasper, the man she had almost married before Larkin. The man her father had called too dangerous for the Montgomery legacy. "Send him up," Evelyn said, her voice steady, despite the flutter in her chest. "Let's see what the golden boy of Beaumont Capital wants with my wreckage." Or the board members filed out of the room, their faces a mixture of awe and terror. They had just witnessed a bloodless execution. Evelyn remained at the head of the table, her hands clasped in front of her. The scent of Larkin's expensive cologne still lingered in the air, a ghost of a life she was rapidly exorcising. The heavy double doors swung open again. This time it wasn't a frantic Larkin or a calculated Bennett. Jasper Beaumont walked in with the effortless grace of a man who owned the air he breathed. He wasn't wearing a suit. Instead, he wore a black turtleneck and tailored charcoal trousers. He looked exactly as he had 3 years ago, devastatingly handsome, with a jawline that could cut glass and eyes the color of a stormy Atlantic. "Evelyn," he said. His voice was a low baritone that sent a tremor through her that she fought to suppress. "Jasper," she replied, keeping her tone professional. "My brother says you're claiming a prior interest in Whitaker Tech. I find that hard to believe. Larkin hated you. He spent half our marriage trying to out-earn the Beaumont name." Jasper pulled out a chair directly opposite her, ignoring Bennett, who was watching him like a hawk from the corner. Jasper placed a single, weathered document on the table. "Larkin didn't hate me because of my money, Eve. He hated me because I held the leash," Jasper said calmly. 4 years ago, before you even met him, Larkin was in trouble. He had stolen the initial source code for his revolutionary software from a developer in Palo Alto. That developer was a subsidiary of Beaumont Capital. Evelyn felt the world tilt. "He stole it?" "In full," Jasper confirmed. "I could have crushed him then. I could have sent him to prison. But I saw how he looked at you at that charity gala in the Hamptons. I knew you were looking for an escape from the Montgomery shadow. I made a deal with him." Evelyn stood up, her chair screeching against the floor. "What kind of deal?" Jasper's gaze didn't waver. "I told him I wouldn't sue if he built the company and made it successful. But the moment he mistreated you, or the moment you left him, 50% of his founder's shares would automatically transfer to Beaumont Capital. I didn't want him to marry you for your money, Eve. I wanted him to be terrified of losing you because you were the only thing keeping him in business." The room went silent. Bennett let out a low whistle. "So, all this time, Larkin's success was a house of cards built on a Beaumont stay of execution." "Exactly," Jasper said. He looked only at Evelyn. "He failed the treatment part of the contract a long time ago. I've been watching, Eve. I saw the way he spoke to you. I saw the Chloe Vane affair start. I was waiting for you to realize who he was. Last night at the Pierre, that was the trigger." Evelyn felt a surge of fury. "So you've been puppeteering my marriage? You let me stay with a man who was gaslighting me just so you could play a long-term financial game?" "No," Jasper said, finally standing up. He walked around the table until he was standing just outside her personal space. "I let you make your own choices. You wanted to be Evelyn, the waitress. You wanted to see if someone would love you without the Montgomery name. If I had stepped in, you would have hated me for it. You had to see his true colors on your own." He reached out, his fingers hovering near her hand, but not touching. "But now that you've signed those papers, the deal is active. I own 50% of this company. You, through the Zenith Fund, own the other 50. We're partners, Evelyn, whether you like it or not." Evelyn looked down at the document. The signature at the bottom was unmistakably Larkin's, shaky and desperate, dated years ago. "You're unbelievable," she whispered. "I'm a Beaumont," he corrected with a faint, wry smile. "We don't lose, and I certainly don't lose the things I care about, twice." Before Evelyn could respond, her desk phone rang. It was the lobby. "Miss Montgomery? We have a problem. Beatrice Whitaker is in the lobby with a group of reporters. She's screaming about elder abuse and claiming you've kidnapped her son. And Larkin is with her. He's telling them you forced him to sign the divorce papers under duress." Evelyn looked at Jasper. Then she looked at the partnership agreement on the table. "It seems our first act as partners is a PR execution," Evelyn said, her eyes flashing with a new, dangerous light. "Bennett, get the security footage from the Pierre, the footage from the hallway upstairs where Larkin told me to use the service entrance." She turned to Jasper. "Do you still have the original theft files from the Palo Alto developer?" Jasper tapped his breast pocket, encrypted and ready to upload. "Good," Evelyn said, smoothing her jacket. "Let's go downstairs. I think it's time the world sees what happens when you try to bully a Montgomery and a Beaumont at the same time." As they stepped into the elevator, Evelyn realized she wasn't just taking back her company. She was stepping into a world where the stakes were higher than she had ever imagined. And Jasper, the man she had tried to forget, was no longer just a memory. He was the most powerful ally and the most dangerous distraction she had. The elevator descended toward the lobby like a guillotine blade. Evelyn could feel the vibration of the building, or perhaps it was just the sheer force of the storm waiting for her behind the glass doors. Beside her, Jasper Beaumont stood like a statue of tempered steel, his presence a silent promise of destruction. "Ready?" Jasper asked, his voice barely a murmur. "I've spent 3 years being quiet," Evelyn replied, checking her reflection in the polished brass of the elevator door. "I'm done being the secret." The doors slid open. The lobby was a sea of flashing lights and shouted questions. At the center of the chaos stood Beatrice Whittaker, her face twisted into a mask of righteous indignation, clutching a designer handkerchief as if it were a battle flag. Larkin stood beside her, looking practiced in his misery, his shoulders slumped to mimic a man broken by a cold-hearted wife. "There she is!" Beatrice shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at Evelyn. "The woman who wormed her way into our family, only to stab my son in the back. She used her father's billions to hijack his company. She's a predator!" The reporters surged forward, microphones thrust like spears. "Miss Montgomery, did you use the Zenith Fund to force a hostile takeover?" "Larkin claims you blackmailed him into signing the divorce papers. Any comment?" Evelyn didn't stop until she was 10 feet from the podium Larkin had set up. She didn't look at the cameras. She looked directly at Larkin. He flinched, his victim persona flickering for a split second. "Larkin," Evelyn said, her voice clear and unnervingly calm. "You always said you wanted to be famous. I suppose you should have been more specific about the reason." She signaled to the massive digital display behind the reception desk, a screen usually reserved for stock tickers and company branding. Suddenly the Whittaker Tech logo vanished, replaced by high-definition security footage from the Pierre Hotel. The lobby went silent. The audio was crisp. The screen showed the upstairs hallway from the previous night. The crowd watched as Larkin snarled at Evelyn, his face contorted with a cruelty the public had never seen. "I've provided for you for 3 years. Consider the clothes on your back your severance package. Go. I won't have you staining the carpet when the Montgomerys arrive." Then the footage cut to Beatrice, whispering into Evelyn's ear, "Go, you pathetic little mouse, before I have security drag you out." A collective gasp rippled through the reporters. Beatrice's face turned from pale to a ghastly, bruised purple. Larkin's jaw dropped. That's taken out of context," Larkin stammered, turning to the cameras. "Every marriage has its heated moments." "It wasn't a heated moment, Larkin. It was a pattern," Evelyn said. She stepped up to the microphones. "For 3 years, I lived as a ghost in my own home. I was told I was worthless while I was quietly fixing the bugs in your software. I was told I was a burden while I was securing the very investments that kept your lights on." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. "But we aren't here just to discuss the end of a marriage. We're here to discuss the end of a fraud." She nodded to Jasper. He stepped forward, sliding a tablet into the system. The screen changed again. This time it showed a side-by-side comparison of Whittaker Tech's core algorithm and a Beaumont Capital patent from 4 years ago. "This is the Whittaker core," Jasper announced to the room, "and this is the code Larkin Whittaker stole from a Palo Alto developer under my umbrella. He didn't build this company on innovation. He built it on theft, and a very specific legal agreement he signed to keep himself out of a federal penitentiary." The reporters went into a frenzy. This wasn't just a divorce scandal, it was a corporate autopsy. "Wait!" Chloe Vane pushed through the crowd, her eyes wild. She looked at Evelyn, then at Jasper. "Larkin told me he owned everything. He said the Montgomerys were just a temporary bridge." She turned to Larkin, her voice shrill. You told me the offshore accounts were safe. You said if we got the merger through, we'd move the Vane project funds to the Caymans." Evelyn's eyebrows rose. "The Vane project funds? You mean the $7 million Larkin diverted from the R&D budget over the last 6 months?" Chloe froze. She realized, too late, that in her panic to save her own skin, she had just confessed to a felony on live television. "Chloe, shut up!" Larkin roared. But it was over. 2 men in dark suits who had been standing quietly at the back of the lobby stepped forward. They weren't Montgomery security. They were federal agents. "Mr. Whitaker, Miss Vane," the lead agent said, holding up a badge. "We've been monitoring the Zenith Fund's internal audit reports provided to us this morning. We have questions regarding corporate embezzlement and wire fraud. You'll both need to come with us." As the handcuffs clicked around Larkin's wrists, Beatrice let out a sound like a wounded animal. She reached out for Larkin, but a security guard stepped in her way. "Evelyn!" Larkin yelled as he was led towards the door. "You can't do this! I loved you." Evelyn watched him go, his silhouette framed by the flashing lights of the police cruisers outside. She didn't feel the triumph she expected. She just felt light. "You okay?" Jasper asked, his hand momentarily touching the small of her back. "I'm fine," she said, finally looking at him. "But you said we were partners, Jasper. Partners don't keep secrets." Jasper's expression shifted, a shadow of something old and painful crossing his eyes. "I know. And there's one more thing you need to see, something your father kept from you, something that explains why I didn't come for you 3 years ago." He led her away from the cameras, towards the private elevators. "Arthur Montgomery didn't just forbid our marriage, Evelyn," Jasper said as the doors closed. "He threatened to liquidate your entire trust and use his influence to blackball you from every industry in the country if you stayed with me. He wanted you to marry a nobody like Larkin because he knew a man like that would be easy to control. He didn't realize Larkin would be a monster. He just wanted you back under his thumb." Evelyn felt a new kind of coldness settle in her chest. Her father, the man who had just stood by her at the pier, had been the architect of her misery all along. The silence of the private elevator felt heavy, a stark contrast to the media circus erupting 40 floors below. Evelyn stared at the floor numbers ticking upward, her mind reeling from Jasper's revelation. For 3 years, she had blamed herself for choosing Larkin. She had blamed her own desire for a simple life. But now she realized her simple life had been a carefully constructed prison, and her father had held the blueprints. "Why tell me this now, Jasper?" Evelyn asked, her voice tight. "Why not 3 years ago, when I was crying on your doorstep, begging you to run away with me?" Jasper leaned against the mahogany paneling of the elevator, his eyes dark with a mixture of regret and simmering fury. "Because 3 years ago, I didn't have the leverage to protect you. Your father didn't just threaten you, Eve. He threatened to dismantle Beaumont Capital. I had 3,000 employees depending on me. I had to choose between the woman I loved and the lives of the people who trusted me." He stepped closer, the scent of cedar and expensive tobacco enveloping her. "I spent every second of those 3 years building a fortress. I bought up the debt your father thought was invisible. I tracked every penny Larkin stole. I waited until Arthur Montgomery was vulnerable. That time is now." The elevator chimed. They weren't at the executive level. They were at the rooftop helipad. Standing by the idling AW-139 helicopter was Arthur Montgomery. He looked every bit the patriarch. Stoic, powerful, his silver hair catching the morning light. He wasn't surprised to see them. He looked at his daughter with a patronizing smile that made Evelyn's stomach churn. "Evelyn," Arthur said, his voice projecting over the thrum of the rotors. "A masterful performance downstairs. The Whitaker problem is solved. The press is already calling you the steel magnolia of Wall Street. Come, we have a lunch meeting with the Board of Trade. It's time to bring her back into the fold properly." Evelyn didn't move. She stood her ground, the wind from the blades whipping her hair across her face. The Whittaker problem wasn't just Larkin, was it, Dad? It was you. Arthur's smile didn't falter, but his eyes chilled. I don't know what Jasper has been whispering in your ear, but I did what any father would do. I protected you from a man who wasn't your equal. You didn't protect me, Evelyn screamed, the sound tearing from her throat. Or you handed me to a predator because you knew he'd be too weak to challenge you. You let me be gaslit, insulted, and humiliated for 1,000 days, just so you could keep me on a leash. Arthur stepped forward, his aura of calm cracking to reveal the tyrant beneath. You were becoming rebellious, Evelyn. You wanted to marry a Beaumont, a family that has been trying to erode our market share for decades. I couldn't allow the Montgomery legacy to be diluted by your sentimentalities. He turned his gaze to Jasper. And you? You think a few debt buybacks make you a king? You're still just a boy playing with blocks. I can still crush you. Try it, Jasper said, stepping in front of Evelyn. He pulled a small black flash drive from his pocket. On this drive is the evidence of the Vane Project's true origin. Larkin didn't come up with the idea to embezzle that money, Arthur. He didn't have the brains. You coached him. You needed a way to move Montgomery assets into offshore accounts without the SEC noticing, and you used your son-in-law's failing company as a laundromat. Evelyn felt the last shred of her childhood innocence disintegrate. You were stealing from your own daughter's life? I was securing our future, Arthur bellowed, his face reddening. The world is changing, Evelyn. Taxes, regulations. I was protecting the empire. You were protecting yourself, Evelyn countered. She walked up to her father, ignoring the roar of the helicopter. She took the divorce papers, still clutched in her hand, and shoved them against his chest. I'm not a Montgomery anymore, and I'm certainly not a Whittaker. What are you saying? Arthur hissed. I'm saying that as of 10 minutes ago, I resigned from the Montgomery Foundation, Evelyn said, her voice dropping to a deadly, quiet register. And because I still hold the power of attorney you gave me when you thought I was your loyal little mouse, I've authorized a full internal audit of the Montgomery holdings, the feds who took Larkin. They're waiting for your call next. Arthur's face went from red to a ghostly, translucent white. You wouldn't. I'm your father. You were a jailer, Evelyn replied, and I just broke the locks. She turned her back on him, walking towards the rooftop exit. Jasper followed her, but before he left, he leaned into Arthur's ear. I told you 3 years ago, Arthur, Jasper whispered. If you hurt her, I'd burn your world down. I hope you brought a fire extinguisher. As they descended back into the building, the sound of the helicopter taking off echoed above them. Arthur Montgomery fleeing the scene of his own undoing. Evelyn leaned against the wall of the stairwell, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by a hollow ache. It's over, she whispered. No, Jasper said, taking her hand. This time he didn't let go. The drama is over. The life? That's just beginning. But as they reached the lobby, a new figure was waiting. A woman in a sharp grey suit, holding a legal folder. Miss Montgomery, the woman asked. My name is Leah Sterling. I represent the estate of your late mother. There was a codicil in her will that was only to be opened upon your divorce from Larkin Whittaker. It concerns a property in Switzerland, and a brother you never knew you had. Evelyn looked at Jasper, then at the folder. The twists, it seemed, were far from over. The folder in Leah Sterling's hand felt heavier than the $40 million debt Evelyn had just settled. The name Sterling didn't ring any bells, but the look of pure, unadulterated shock on Jasper's face told Evelyn that this wasn't just another legal hurdle. For a moment, the bustling lobby of Whittaker Tech, now a crime scene of Larkin's ambition, seemed to fade into a blur of grey and white. A brother, Evelyn whispered, her voice cracking for the first time since the gala. My mother died when I was 10. My father told me I was an only child, besides Bennett." "Arthur lied about many things, Miss Montgomery," Leah Sterling said, her eyes full of a strange, professional pity. She opened the folder, revealing a birth certificate weathered by time and a photograph of a young woman who looked exactly like Evelyn, holding a baby boy in a garden that wasn't in New York. "Your mother, Catherine, knew the man she married. She knew he would try to consolidate power through his children, treating them like assets to be traded. To protect her firstborn son from becoming another cog in Arthur's machine, she sent him away. He's been living in Zurich under the name Leo Vance." "Rio." Jasper stiffened beside her, his hand tightening almost imperceptibly on the back of her chair. "Leo Vance, the architect of the Alpine Crypto Exchange, the man who just bought out the Montgomery interests in the European sector." Leah nodded, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. "He didn't just buy them out, Mr. Beaumont. He reclaimed them. He's been waiting for Evelyn to free herself. He knew he couldn't step into the light until the Whittaker marriage was dissolved and Arthur was compromised. He didn't want to bring Evelyn into a new war until she had finished her old one." Evelyn felt a surge of dizzying realization. Every moment of her life had been a chess match between people she thought she knew and ghosts she hadn't even met. She looked at Jasper, seeing the flickers of recognition in his eyes. He hadn't just been protecting her. He had been part of a much larger, global movement to dismantle her father's tyranny. 3 months later, the air in Switzerland was crisp, smelling of pine, ancient snow, and the promise of a quiet that Evelyn had never known in the frantic corridors of Manhattan. She stood on the marble balcony of the Villa Catherine, looking out over the sapphire waters of Lake Zurich. The morning mist was lifting, revealing the jagged, majestic peaks of the Alps. She was no longer the woman in the faded floral dress, the one who apologized for taking up space. Today she wore a silk trousers set the color of ivory, her skin glowing with a health that New York's smog and Larkin's toxicity had never allowed. Her hair, once kept in a tight, practical bun to avoid Larkin's critiques, now fell loosely over her shoulders. Behind her, the glass doors slid open with a soft hiss. A man walked out, his stride echoing her own. He was tall, with the same high cheekbones and the same piercing, intelligent gaze. He looked strikingly like her, but with the weathered, sharp eyes of someone who had survived a different kind of war. "You look like her," Leo Vance said, leaning against the railing. His voice carried a slight European lilt, smoothed over by years of international business. "Our mother. She used to stand exactly where you are and tell me that one day the Montgomery name would be a footnote in our story, not the title. She called this place the Sanctuary. I think she always intended for you to find your way here." "You've been watching me the whole time, haven't you?" Evelyn asked, not with anger, but with a profound, newfound curiosity. "In Palo Alto, in New York, you were there. I was the anonymous developer in Palo Alto that Jasper mentioned," Leo admitted with a small, crooked smile. "I let Larkin steal that code. I knew his character, or lack thereof. I needed a hook in him, a way to ensure that if he ever truly destroyed you, I could bankrupt him in an hour. It was a safety net, Evelyn. Jasper and we've been partners for a long time. We were 2 men waiting for one woman to realize she was stronger than both of us combined." Evelyn turned to see Jasper standing in the doorway, holding 2 glasses of wine. He looked relaxed, the permanent crease of worry between his brows finally gone. He looked at Evelyn not as a project to be saved, but as an equal. "So the golden boy and the secret brother were the ones pulling the strings?" Evelyn asked, taking a glass from Jasper. The wine was cold and crisp, much like her new reality. "We provided the stage, Eve," Jasper said softly, his fingers brushing hers as she took the glass. "But you were the one who chose to walk onto it. You were the one who signed the papers in silence while they all watched your arrogance. You did the hard part. You stood up when the world told you to stay on your knees." The news on the tablet nearby flickered with a final update from the States. Larkin Whittaker had been sentenced to 12 years for corporate fraud and embezzlement. Beatrice Whittaker had been forced to sell her New York properties and her beloved Chanel collection to pay back the Montgomery heirlooms she had misplaced. And Arthur Montgomery? He was currently under house arrest in his Hamptons estate, his empire carved up by the very children he had tried to suppress. He was a king of nothing, ruling over an empty house. Evelyn took a long sip of her wine, the bitterness of the past finally being replaced by the sweetness of the present. She looked at Jasper, then at Leo, then at the vast open horizon of her new life. For the first time, the silence wasn't something she was forced into. It was something she owned. She wasn't just a survivor. She was the architect of her own destiny. And for the first time in 30 years, she was exactly where she was meant to be. And that is the story of how Evelyn Montgomery Whittaker turned her silence into her greatest weapon. She proved that being a mouse was just a mask, and when the mask came off, the world trembled. Larkin Whittaker thought he was marrying a waitress he could control. He ended up losing everything to a queen who was 3 steps ahead. If you enjoyed this journey of betrayal, revenge, and the ultimate comeback, make sure to hit that like button right now. It helps the channel more than you know. What would you have done if you found out your husband was a fraud and your father was the puppet master? Let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to share this video with someone who needs to see a victory for the underdog, and subscribe to the channel with notifications turned on so you never miss a dramatic real-life retelling. Thank you for watching, and remember, never mistake silence for weakness. See you in the next story.
I mean, they've been trying to cancel me for about 15 years, and they've always failed. And often the people trying to cancel me have been other comedians writing for the posh papers, doing that thing they always say, he's punching down. Well, comedy should punch up. We only punch up. We punch up. Their idea of punching up, they have a go at Boris Johnson. How the fuck is that punching up? You know, the cunt is learning disabled. He's like this fucking waterlogged Gary Busey, fucking albino Eggman thing. He can't string a sentence together. Have you heard him talk? He's like, he's a fucking moron. I punch up. I have a go at people like, I don't know, Stephen Hawking, right? Yes, the greatest brain that's ever lived. He can take it. And he wouldn't even have minded when he was alive, because he's part robot, isn't he? I think he's basically a talking chair, so you can say what you want. And he was on Epstein's Island, apparently, so fuck him. I don't... What was he doing there? Why do I want to go? Why? Why do I? You're not just there doing fuck. I would go, what? I know pedos who'd kill for a ticket to that. And he's just taking up a space. It's probably DEI or something. And they go, we need one. Like, I'll go, what are you doing here, Steve? He go, I'm thinking weird shit. Fuck off. That is probably a hate crime. That is. It's a bit like Eddie Redmayne got in trouble when he played Stephen Hawking in the biopic, The Life Story of Stephen Hawking, right? Won an Oscar for it, and that's when the backlash started. People going, no, it should be played by a real disabled creature, all this, right? And they're going, the actor should have the same disability as the person they're portraying. But it was the life story of Stephen Hawking, right? So for the first part of the film, the cunt could walk, right? So I put it to you, what is easier? Getting an actor who can walk, pretend he can't for the last bit of the film, or get an actor who can't walk, pretend he can for the first bit? How would that even fucking work? Puppetry, think. You can't always find an actor with the same disability as the person they're portraying. They're fucking actors. What if they did a biopic of Helen Keller, the deaf, dumb and blind girl? Well, what's the chances of finding a deaf, dumb and blind actress who can play that role? And if you did, you go right into the director and go, we found a deaf, dumb and blind girl. What did she say? She didn't even answer the fucking phone. Oh, don't get me started. Oh.